Princess Vela Morn stood before the full-length mirror in her chambers, studying the reflection that looked back at her. The ceremonial robes of her people hung perfectly on her tall, slender frame. The fabric shimmered with threads that changed. Color with her thoughts, a tradition among the Caltheon people. Right now the threads flickered between blue and gray, showing her conflicted emotions to anyone who knew how to read them. Today she would marry a human. Today she would bind herself to one of them for the rest of her life. The thought made her skin prickle with unease. Her attendant, an older Caltheon woman named Syria, adjusted the collar of the robe. "You look beautiful, princess. Your father will be proud." Vela said nothing. Pride was not what she felt. Duty, yes. Responsibility, certainly. But pride? That emotion seemed far away right now. The war had been coming for years. Everyone knew it. The Caltheon Empire had ruled this section of space for over 10,000 years. They had built a civilization on patience, careful planning, and the wisdom that came from living for centuries. Every decision was made with the future in mind. Every action was calculated. Then the humans arrived. They came from a small blue planet on the edge of known space, and within 200 years, they had spread across dozens of systems. They built colonies faster than the Caltheon could count them. They made alliances with species the Caltheon had never bothered to contact. They moved through space like water flowing downhill, finding every crack and filling it. The Caltheon Empire watched with growing alarm. 3 times their forces had clashed with human ships in disputed territories. 3 times the humans had fought in ways that made no sense. They took risks that should have destroyed them. They made decisions in seconds that the Caltheon would have debated for weeks. And somehow, impossibly, they won. After the 3rd skirmish, the Emperor called his council together. Vela had been there, standing in the back of the Great Hall, listening as the military commanders argued for immediate action. "We should strike now," General Morath had said, "before they grow stronger." But the Emperor shook his head. "We do not know enough about them. Every encounter shows us something new, something unexpected. We need time to understand them." "Then how do we get that time?" another council member asked. The Emperor had looked directly at Vela when he answered. "Through marriage. We will bind their leadership to ours through the oldest treaty known to civilized people. We will have peace and time to learn." Vela had known in that moment that he meant her. She was the 3rd daughter, valuable enough to matter, but not so important that her absence would cripple the royal family. She was a trained diplomat and strategist. She could read people, understand their motivations, predict their actions. She was perfect for this task. When her father called her to his private chambers that evening, she had already prepared her acceptance speech. "You understand what I am asking?" the Emperor said, his ancient eyes studying her face. "Yes, father. You need someone to watch them up close, to understand how they think, to find their weaknesses, and to prevent a war that would cost millions of lives." "That too," Vela agreed. The human government had accepted the proposal quickly. Too quickly, Vela thought. The Caltheon had expected months of negotiation, but the humans had agreed within a week. They nominated one of their military officers, a man named Jake Morrison. The file on him was surprisingly thin. He was 34 years old, which was barely adult by Caltheon standards. He had served in their Special Operations Forces for 10 years, before transferring to the Diplomatic Corps. His record showed several commendations for bravery and some classified missions that Vela could not access. The photo showed a man with brown hair and light eyes, unremarkable by human standards. He was neither tall nor short, neither handsome nor ugly. He looked ordinary. That worried Vela more than if he had looked dangerous. Ordinary meant underestimated. Ordinary meant hidden depths. A chime sounded in her chambers, pulling Vela from her thoughts. "It is time, princess," Syria said softly. The ceremony took place on Haven Point, a neutral station built specifically for this occasion. It orbited a yellow star halfway between Caltheon and human space. The station's designers had tried to blend both architectural styles, resulting in something that pleased neither culture, but offended neither either. The hall was filled with delegates from dozens of species. The Calthean delegation sat on one side, tall and quiet, their robes showing carefully controlled colors of dignity and hope. The human delegation sat on the other side, shorter and louder, wearing formal uniforms that looked uncomfortable. Vela could hear them whispering to each other, could see them fidgeting in their seats. Such poor discipline, she thought. Then Jake Morrison walked down the aisle toward her, and Vela got her first real look at her future husband. He moved with a quiet confidence that the file had not captured. His uniform fit him well, and he wore it with the ease of someone who had spent years in it. His face was calm, but his eyes were active, taking in everything around him. When those eyes met hers, Vela tried to read his thoughts as she would any Caltheon. She found nothing. A blank wall. Humans, she remembered, had natural mental barriers. Their thoughts were their own, locked away where telepaths could not reach. It was one of the things that made them so unsettling to other species. You could never be quite sure what they were thinking. Jake stopped in front of her and gave a small bow. "Princess Vela," he said. His voice was steady, his pronunciation of her name nearly perfect. "Thank you for doing this." The words surprised her. She had expected formality, not gratitude. "It is my duty," she replied. "Still," he said and smiled slightly. "I know this isn't easy for either of us." The ceremony itself was a careful blend of both cultures. A Caltheon priest spoke ancient words about the binding of souls and the meeting of minds. A human officiant talked about partnership and mutual respect. Vela and Jake each made their vows, speaking words written by committees from both governments. When it came time to seal the marriage, they followed the human tradition. Jake stepped closer and took her hand. His skin was warm, almost hot compared to her own. He lifted her hand and kissed the back of it gently, his eyes never leaving her face. It was intimate in a way Vela had not expected, and she felt her robes flicker with surprise. The humans in the audience began to cry. Vela stared at them in confusion. Crying was for grief, for loss, for pain. Why were they crying at a wedding? She looked at Jake, searching for an explanation. "It's a human thing," he said quietly, as if reading her confusion even without telepathy. "We cry when we're happy sometimes. I know it seems strange." Strange did not begin to cover it, but Vela nodded and turned back to face the crowd as the officiant declared them married. The applause was deafening, the human delegates clapping and cheering with an enthusiasm that made the Caltheon look like statues in comparison. The reception that followed was even more bewildering. Humans kept approaching her, shaking her hand, telling her she looked beautiful, asking if she was excited. They smiled constantly, those strange baring of teeth that could mean joy or nervousness or aggression depending on context. They laughed loudly at jokes she did not understand. They touched each other casually, putting hands on shoulders and backs in a way that would be incredibly rude in Caltheon culture. Jake stayed near her through it all, a quiet presence at her side. He introduced her to various human officials, translating not just their words but their meanings. "Admiral Cole is genuinely happy about this," he said at one point. "He lost a son in the second skirmish. He wants peace more than most." Vela studied the Admiral, seeing the sadness behind his smile. "I am sorry for his loss," she said formally. The Admiral's eyes grew wet, but he smiled wider. "Thank you, Princess. That means a lot." More crying. Vela was beginning to think humans leaked emotions the way other species breathed. As the evening wore on, Vela watched her new husband interact with his people. He was comfortable with them in a way he was not with her. He laughed at their jokes, clapped them on the back, told stories that made them roar with laughter. But whenever he turned back to her, a polite mask fell over his features, friendly but distant. Respectful but guarded, he was hiding something, or perhaps hiding everything. Vela could not tell which, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. Finally, mercifully, the reception ended. Vela and Jake were escorted to their new quarters on Haven Point. The suite was large, with separate sleeping areas connected by a common living space. Another compromise between cultures. Jake stood in the middle of the living room, looking around as if memorizing every detail. The smile he had worn all day was gone, replaced by something more neutral. More real, Vela thought. "So," he said finally. "This is weird." The blunt statement surprised a laugh out of Vela. "Yes," she agreed. "It is very weird." He turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw genuine emotion on his face. Tiredness, yes, but also something like sadness. "I know why you agreed to this," he said. "Your people want to understand us, want to find out if we're a threat." Vela felt her robes flicker with alarm. It's okay," Jake interrupted. "I'd do the same thing in your position. Hell, my government is probably hoping I'll learn your secrets too." That's how. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and Vela had settled into a routine that felt almost normal. Almost, but not quite. She woke each morning in her chambers, spent an hour meditating in the Caltheon way, and then joined Jake for breakfast in their shared living space. He usually had coffee, that bitter human drink that smelled better than it tasted. She had tea made from plants imported from her homeworld. They would discuss their schedules for the day, exchange pleasantries, and then go their separate ways. It was all very civilized. Very polite. Very distant. Vela spent her days attending diplomatic functions, meeting with various ambassadors, and filing detailed reports to her father about everything she observed. Jake spent his days in meetings with human officials, reviewing security protocols for the station, and doing whatever it was that former soldiers did when they played at being diplomats. They shared meals. They attended events together. They smiled for the cameras and said nice things about each other in interviews. To the outside world, they were the perfect symbol of peace between their peoples. In private, they were strangers living in the same space. Vela told herself this was fine. This was what she had expected. This was what she had agreed to. But sometimes, late at night, she wondered if there could have been something more. The mining dispute started small, the way these things always did. A Caltheon mining operation on the edge of their territory found rich deposits of rare minerals. But the asteroid field they wanted to mine was only 3 light-years from a human colony. The humans claimed the field fell within their sphere of influence. The Caltheon claimed it belonged to them by right of discovery. Both sides filed formal complaints. Committees were formed. Diplomats wrote long documents arguing their positions. It was all very proper and very slow. Vela attended the meetings, offering her perspective when asked. The process would take months, possibly years. Both sides would argue, compromise, and eventually reach some agreement that neither side loved, but both could accept. This was how civilized species solved their problems. Jake attended one meeting, listened for about an hour, and then left. Vela assumed he was bored. Humans, she had learned, had very short attention spans for formal proceedings. 2 days later, the dispute was resolved. Vela was in her chambers, reviewing the latest diplomatic filings when Ambassador Lyria Sen contacted her. Lyria was her oldest friend, assigned to Haven Point specifically to advise Vela. Her face appeared in the holographic display, and she looked confused. "Vela, have you seen the news about the mining dispute?"
"No, what happened?"
"Did the committee reach a preliminary ruling?" "The committee was dismissed. The dispute is over. The humans and our mining corporation reached a private agreement. They're going to share the asteroid field, split the profits equally, and jointly fund the mining operations." Vela stared at the display. "That's impossible." "The committee just started reviewing the case. We haven't even finished the initial arguments." "I know, but somehow it's done. The agreement was signed this morning." Vela ended the call and immediately went looking for Jake. She found him in the station's observation deck, staring out at the stars with a cup of coffee in his hand. "What did you do?" she demanded. He turned, looking genuinely confused. "About what?" "The mining dispute." "It's resolved. How?" "Oh, that," Jake shrugged. "I called the administrator of the human colony and the director of your mining corporation. We talked for about an hour. I suggested they work together instead of fighting over who got to work alone. They agreed it made financial sense. Everyone wins." Vela felt her robes flickering through a dozen colors as her emotions swirled. "You had no authority to negotiate on behalf of the Caltheon Empire." "I didn't negotiate on behalf of anyone. I just suggested an idea. They made their own decision." But the committee, the proper channels, the diplomatic process, would have taken months and cost both sides a fortune in legal fees. Jake finished. This way it's done, everyone's happy, and we can all move on. That's not how these things are done. Jake took a sip of his coffee, maddeningly calm. Maybe that's the problem. Look, Vela, I understand your people like to take their time, consider every angle, make sure everything is perfect. That's fine. But sometimes the simple solution is the right solution. Why make things complicated when they don't have to be? Vela wanted to argue, to explain why the proper process mattered, why rushing led to mistakes. But she could not deny the results. The dispute was over. Both sides were satisfied. Peace was maintained. It should have made her happy. Instead, it made her uneasy. That uneasiness grew worse a week later when Jake's friend visited the station. Lieutenant Danny Costa was everything Jake was not. He was loud, energetic, and smiled constantly. He hugged Jake when he saw him, slapping him on the back hard enough that Vela heard the impact from across the docking bay. Jake, you old bastard. How's married life treating you? Jake grinned, the first genuine smile Vela had seen on his face in weeks. Better than getting shot at, that's for sure. That's a low bar, man. Vela stood awkwardly to the side as the two men talked and laughed. Jake eventually remembered she was there and made introductions. Danny, this is my wife, Princess Vela. Vela, this is Danny. We served together for 8 years. Danny's smile softened into something more respectful. Your Highness, it's an honor. Jake's told me a lot about you. He has? Vela glanced at Jake, surprised. All good things, I promise. Danny winked at her, and Vela had no idea how to respond to that. That evening, Jake invited Danny to their quarters for dinner. Vela had intended to eat alone and let them catch up, but Jake insisted she join them. Danny doesn't bite, he said. Usually. Dinner was a strange experience. Danny told stories that made Jake laugh, really laugh, in a way Vela had never seen. They talked about their time in the military, about missions they had been on, about friends they had lost. Remember the Talon Station rescue? Danny said, refilling his wine glass. That was insane. Jake's smile faded slightly. Yeah, that was a bad one. Bad? Brother, we were outnumbered 10-1. The hostages were scattered across 3 different sections. We had maybe 20 minutes before the pirates started executing people. Danny turned to Vela. Your Highness, you should have seen him. Jake here put together a plan in about 5 minutes that somehow worked. We got all the hostages out and only lost 2 guys on our side. Only 2, Jake said quietly, staring at his plate. In that situation, that was a miracle. Danny leaned back in his chair. The planning committee wanted to send in a bigger force, wait for reinforcements. Would have taken hours to organize. Jake said no, we go now. And he was right. Vela looked at Jake, seeing him differently. You made that decision? To go in immediately? Someone had to, Jake said. The pirates were getting nervous. If we waited, people would die. So we moved. But the risk was worth it. Jake interrupted, finally looking up at her. Sometimes waiting is the biggest risk of all. Danny laughed, breaking the tension. That's our Jake, always running toward the fire while everyone else is running away. They continued talking, but Vela only half listened. She was thinking about what Danny had said. Jake had made a split-second decision that saved lives, but could just as easily have killed his entire team. He had trusted his instincts over planning, action over caution. It was so alien to how Vela thought that she could barely comprehend it. The next day brought another example. Of that alien thinking, a hull breach occurred in one of the station's cargo bays. It was not a major emergency. The section was already sealed off and no one was in immediate danger. But the automated systems had failed to respond properly, and there were maintenance workers trapped in an adjacent section with only a few hours of air. Vela was in a conference room when the alarm sounded. The station commander, a neutral alien named Kellis Vorn, immediately began coordinating the response. Teams were dispatched, evacuation protocols activated, everything done by procedure. Then Jake stood up, said, "Excuse me," and left the room at a run. Vela followed, confused. She found him in the corridor outside the conference room, pulling on an emergency pressure suit. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "The maintenance workers are trapped. I'm going to get them out." He was checking the suit seals with practiced efficiency. "There are teams being dispatched, trained rescue personnel. Who won't get there for another 30 minutes? The workers might not have 30 minutes. He finished sealing the suit and headed for the emergency access corridor. Vela grabbed his arm. Jake, you could die. You're not even trained for this. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something cold and calculating in his eyes. Not cruel, but utterly practical. I was special operations for 10 years, Vela. I know how to do this. And those people need help now, not later. He pulled his arm free and ran toward the breach, leaving Vela standing alone in the corridor. For the next hour, Vela sat in the command center with Commander Vorn and the rest of the response team, watching on screens as Jake worked his way through damaged sections of the station. He moved with confidence, finding alternate routes when primary paths were blocked, using tools he found along the way to force open doors and override damaged systems. He reached the trapped workers with minutes to spare, helped them into. The ship appeared without warning. One moment, space around Haven Point was empty. The next, a vessel the size of a small moon hung in orbit, its surface gleaming with patterns of light that hurt to look at directly. Vela was in a diplomatic reception, when every screen in the room suddenly displayed the same image, a being that looked like it was made of crystallized starlight, speaking in a voice that resonated in frequencies no natural throat could produce. We are the architects, it said. We have come with a warning. The variable factor grows unchecked. This cannot continue. Then the screens went dark. The room erupted in chaos. Ambassadors from a dozen species started shouting questions, demanding explanations, calling their governments. Vela stood frozen, her mind trying to process what she had just seen. The architects. They were legend among the old species, ancient beings who had existed long before any current civilization had learned to make fire. They moved through the universe with technology that seemed like magic, and they had not spoken to any of the younger races in over 800 years, until now. Jake appeared at her side, his hand on her arm. We need to go. Now. What? Why? Because when gods show up and give warnings, it's usually smart to listen from somewhere safe. He was already guiding her toward the exit. Commander Vorn's voice came over the station-wide communication system. All personnel are to return to their quarters immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of emergency meetings and panicked communications. The architect ship remained in orbit, silent and ominous. Every government in known space was demanding information, answers, action. Vela was called into an emergency council meeting via quantum link. She stood in a secure room while holographic projections of her father, the High Council, and various military commanders appeared around her. What do you know of this? The Emperor demanded. No more than you, Father. The architects appeared and gave their warning. They've said nothing since. The warning mentioned a variable factor. We believe they're referring to the humans. This came from High Priest Morin Kalth, an elderly Kalthian who served as spiritual advisor to the Emperor. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence. This is about humanity's expansion. General Morath nodded, his expression grim. I've been warning the Council about this for years. Humans are an uncontrolled element. Now even the architects see them as a threat. Vela felt her robes flickering with anger. You don't know that. The architects didn't specifically mention humans. They didn't have to, Morath replied. What else has changed in the past 200 years? What other variable factor has disrupted the balance of power in this region of space? Before Vela could respond, a new holographic figure appeared in the chamber. It was the architect, looking exactly as it had on the screens earlier. The council chamber fell silent. Caltheon Empire, the architect said. We will explain our warning. Attend. For the next hour, the architect spoke, and Vela felt her understanding of the universe crack and shatter. The architects had been watching galactic civilization for millions of years. In that time, they had identified 47 species that posed existential threats to all other life. Not because they were evil or cruel, but because they were too successful, too adaptable, too dangerous to be allowed to spread unchecked. 46 of these species were warrior races, the architect explained. conquerors who would have consumed all other life. We eliminated them before they could spread beyond their home systems. Eliminated. The word hung in the air like poison. The 47th species was different, the architect continued. They were not warriors. They were not conquerors. But they possessed traits that made them equally dangerous. Adaptability beyond prediction. Refusal to accept extinction. The ability to weaponize hope itself. They turned every failure into a learning opportunity, every defeat into motivation, every limitation into a challenge to overcome. General Morath leaned forward. What species was this? Humanity. The council chamber exploded with sound. Shouts, demands for explanation, calls for immediate action. Vela stood in the center of it all, feeling numb. The architect waited for the noise to subside. We encountered early humans on their home planet 200,000 years ago. They were primitive, barely using tools. But we saw the pattern in their development. We understood what they would become. So we acted. What did you do? Vela heard herself ask. We deployed a containment weapon, a genetic plague designed to reduce their population below sustainable levels. We expected this would prevent their evolution into a spacefaring threat. You tried to exterminate them, Vela whispered. We did, and we failed. The architect's voice carried something that might have been respect or fear. The plague reduced human population to fewer than 10,000 individuals. Any other species would have gone extinct. But humans survived. They adapted to the genetic bottleneck. They thrived. And they did all of this believing it was a natural disaster, never knowing we had caused it. This is what you fear? The Emperor's voice was tight with controlled emotion. That they survived your attempt to destroy them? We fear what that survival means, the architect replied. They overcame an extinction-level event without advanced technology, without guidance, without even knowing what they were fighting against. They turned what should have been their end into their origin story. That is when we learn to fear humanity, not for what they are, but for what they represent. And now? Morath demanded. What do you want from us? Humanity has spread beyond their home system. They are expanding at rates that exceed our projections. They are forming alliances, building colonies, integrating with other species. They are becoming too powerful to contain without massive loss of life. So we propose a different solution. The architect's projection gestured and new images appeared in the council chamber. Maps of human space, population projections, resource allocations. Humanity must accept limits, population controls, restrictions on expansion, oversight of their technology development. If they accept these terms, peace can be maintained. If they refuse. The architect did not finish the sentence. What if they refuse? The Emperor asked. Then a coalition of forces, led by the older species, will enforce containment. We will not allow another uncontrolled variable to threaten galactic stability. The meeting continued for hours, but Vela barely heard the rest. Her mind was spinning with implications, with fears, with questions that had no good answers. When the council finally dismissed her, Vela returned to her quarters in a daze. She found Jake sitting in their living room staring at nothing, you heard? She asked. Yeah. His voice was flat, empty. The human delegation was given the same briefing. Apparently, we're the boogeyman of the galaxy. Gods tried to kill us and failed, so now everyone else wants to put us in a box. Vela sat down across from him, studying his face. He looked tired. No, not tired, defeated. It was the first time she had seen him look that way. Jake, I didn't know. No one knew about what the architects did to your ancestors. I know you didn't. He looked up at her and his eyes were hollow. But does it matter? They tried to wipe us out before we could even build cities, Vela. They saw us using stone tools and decided we were too dangerous to exist. What does that say about us? It says they were afraid of what you might become. Yeah, monsters. That's what they thought we'd become. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Maybe they were right. Maybe we are too dangerous. Maybe the galaxy would be better off if we just accepted the limits and stopped reaching for more. Vela found herself moving before she thought about it, crossing the room to sit beside him. She took his hand, feeling how cold his skin was. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "I've spent 6 months watching you and your people. Yes, you're dangerous. Yes, you're unpredictable. Yes, you do things that terrify species who've had millions of years to become comfortable with their limitations. But you're not monsters. You're just different. Different how? You see problems and solve them. You see obstacles and climb them. You see the word impossible and treat it like a challenge. That's not evil, Jake. That's just relentlessly, stubbornly hopeful. And hope is terrifying to people who've given up on it." He looked at her. Really, looked at her, and some of the emptiness in his eyes faded. "The human delegation is meeting tomorrow to draft our response to the architect's demands. They're going to refuse the limitations. I know. There's going to be a war, Vela. A real one this time. Not border skirmishes or trade disputes. A war where the oldest species in the galaxy try to put humanity back in its box. And we're not going to let them." "I know," Vela said again, softer this time. "I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear. I know you married me to prevent this exact thing, but we can't accept what they're asking. We can't agree to stop growing, stop learning, stop reaching for the stars just because it makes other people uncomfortable. That's not who we are. We'd rather die free than live in a cage." Vela felt something crack inside her chest, some last wall of distance between them crumbling. "I married you to prevent a war," she said. "But I'm starting to understand that some things are worth fighting for." Jake squeezed her hand. "Even if it means fighting beside monsters?" The human delegation rejected the architect's demands in 3 words. "We respectfully decline." The response was delivered by Admiral Brandon Cole, commander of the Terran response fleet that had gathered near Haven Point. He stood before the assembled governments, broadcast across every communication network in known space, and spoke with quiet dignity. "We understand the concerns that have been raised about humanity's expansion. We acknowledge that our growth has been rapid, and that this has caused uncertainty among older civilizations. However, we cannot and will not accept artificial limits on our development, our population, or our right to explore the universe. These demands ask us to stop being what we are. That is something we cannot accept at any cost." The response from the architects was immediate. "Then you choose conflict." "No," Admiral Cole replied. "We choose freedom. If others choose conflict over that, then we will defend ourselves. But we will not be the aggressors. We will not fire the first shot. We simply will not submit to containment." The architect's projection flickered. "You underestimate the forces arrayed against you. The Calthian Empire alone has military resources that dwarf your entire civilization. Combined with other elder species and our own intervention, you cannot win this conflict." Admiral Cole smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. "You're probably right. But if you think that will stop us from fighting, then you've learned nothing about humanity in the past 200,000 years. After that, everything happened very fast. Fleets began gathering at the borders of human space. The Calthian Empire mobilized its forces. Other species chose sides or declared neutrality. Haven Point, once a symbol of peace, became a pressure cooker of tension as the last neutral ground before open war. Vela watched it all unfold with a growing sense of horror. She attended emergency meetings where her own people debated the best way to contain humanity. She listened to military strategists discuss how many human colonies would need to be blockaded to force surrender. She heard casualty projections that made her sick. And through it all, Jake remained calm. "Disturbingly calm. Doesn't this bother you?" Vela demanded one evening. "There are fleets preparing to attack your people. Doesn't that make you angry, afraid?" "Of course it does," Jake said, looking up from the reports he was reading. "But anger and fear don't solve problems. Action does." "What action? What can you possibly do? This is happening on a scale beyond any individual." "Maybe. But I can still do my part." He returned to his reading, and Vela wanted to shake him. She could not understand his composure. Her own emotions were a storm of fear and anger and guilt. The marriage that was supposed to prevent war had failed. Peace was crumbling. And somehow, Jake just sat there reading reports as if this was another ordinary problem to solve. The human delegation released a counter-proposal. Instead of accepting containment, humanity would agree to monitoring, They would open their research facilities to galactic oversight. They would submit development reports to a neutral council. They would accept observers on their colonies. But they would not accept limits on growth or restrictions on expansion. It's not enough, Ambassador Lyria told Vela during one of their private meetings. The council believes humans are too dangerous to simply monitor. They want guarantees that humanity won't become a threat in the future. What guarantees? Vela asked. How do you guarantee what a species might do centuries from now? You limit their ability to do anything at all, Lyria said sadly. I know it sounds harsh, Vela, but you have to understand the fear. We've had stability for thousands of years. Then humans arrive, and in 2 centuries, they've changed everything. That's terrifying to species who think in terms of millennia. So the answer is to cage them? To stop them from growing? That's not peace, Lyria. That's tyranny. Her friend looked at her with concern. You're starting to sound like one of them. Vela realized Lyria was right. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped thinking of humans as subjects to study and started thinking of them as people who deserved the same rights as any other species. When had that changed? She knew the answer. It had changed the moment Jake risked his life to save trapped workers. It had changed when Danny told stories of impossible rescues. It had changed through 100 small moments where she saw not dangerous aliens, but people trying to do their best in difficult situations. The breaking point came when Vela's brother arrived at Haven Point. Prince Corden Morn was the Emperor's first son, heir to the Caltheon Empire, and commander of the primary fleet now positioned at the edge of human space. He was tall even for a Caltheon, his presence commanding and his expression stern. He arrived with an escort of guards and an attitude of barely controlled hostility. Sister, he greeted Vela formally, when they met in one of Haven Point's conference rooms, brother, she replied with equal formality. Corden's eyes moved to Jake, who stood quietly at Vela's side. So this is the human. Commander Jake Morrison, Jake said, offering his hand. It's good to finally meet you, Your Highness. Corden stared at the offered hand like it might be a weapon. After a long moment, he gripped it briefly, then released it as if burned. We have matters to discuss. Private matters. Anything you need to say to me, you can say in front of Jake, Vela said firmly. Corden's robes flickered with anger. Very well. Father sent me to convince you to return home. This marriage has served its purpose. The peace failed. There's no reason for you to remain here while we prepare for conflict. I'm not leaving. Vela, I said I'm not leaving. Her robes blazed with colors that reflected her emotions. I made vows. I have responsibilities here. Your responsibility is to your people, Corden said coldly. Not to these dangerous children who refuse to accept the wisdom of their elders. These dangerous children survived an extinction event that your precious elders caused. Vela shot back. Maybe they refused to accept wisdom that nearly killed them all. Corden stepped back as if she had struck him. You defend them? After everything? After the architects revealed what they are? The architects revealed that humans are survivors, that they adapt and overcome and refuse to die. Is that really so terrible? Or is it just threatening to those who've forgotten how to struggle? The argument escalated from there, voices rising, both siblings saying things they might regret later. Jake stood silent through it all, his expression neutral, but his eyes tracked every movement in the room. Finally, Corden played his last card. The Emperor has commanded me to negotiate directly with human leadership. I've been authorized to offer terms. If they accept reasonable limitations, not the harsh ones the architects proposed, but moderate restrictions, then we can avoid bloodshed. They'll refuse, Jake said quietly. Corden turned to him. You seem certain, I am. Because you're not really offering freedom with oversight. You're offering a bigger cage, and humans don't do well in cages. Then you'll die in your pride. Maybe. But we'll die free. The negotiations began the next day in Haven Point's largest conference hall. Vela attended as an observer, sitting in the gallery while Corden and his advisors met with Admiral Cole and the human delegation. She watched Corden present his terms. Watched the humans listen politely. Watched Admiral Cole thank him for the offer, and then systematically explain why it was unacceptable. The humans were willing to compromise on many points, but not on their fundamental right to grow and explore. You're being unreasonable, Corden said, frustration creeping into his voice. We're being human, Admiral Cole replied. I understand that's difficult for you to accept, But containment by any other name is still containment. We won't agree to it. The meeting was breaking up, tensions high, and no progress made. When it happened, a figure in maintenance worker coveralls stepped out of a service corridor, raised a plasma weapon, and fired at the human delegation. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Vela saw the weapon rise, saw the energy charge building in the barrel, saw Admiral Cole turning, too slowly, not fast enough to dodge. Then Jake was moving. He crossed the distance between himself and Corden in 3 strides and threw himself at the Caltheon Prince, knocking him aside just as the plasma bolt tore through the space where Corden had been standing. They hit the ground hard, Jake on top of Corden, shielding him with his own body. Security forces were everywhere suddenly, weapons drawn, the assassin being tackled and disarmed. In the chaos that followed, Vela ran to them. Jake rolled off Corden slowly, clutching his left side where the plasma bolt had clipped him. His uniform was burned, the skin beneath it red and blistered. Corden stared up at him in shock. You saved me." "Yeah," Jake gasped, pain clear on his face. "Don't mention it, but why?" "I came here to threaten your people. I've been nothing but hostile to you." Jake managed a weak smile. "You're my brother-in-law. Family's complicated, but you still look out for each other." Medical teams arrived and took Jake to the station's hospital. Vela went with him, her hand clutching his uninjured one. Corden followed, looking dazed. In the hospital room, while doctors treated Jake's burns, Corden stood in the corner watching. The assassin, they had learned, was from a radical faction that wanted to ensure the war happened. They had tried to kill human leadership and make it look like Caltheon aggression. 3 years had passed since the day Jake took a plasma bolt meant for Corden. 3 years of tense peace, of negotiations that moved forward in painful increments, of humanity proving themselves through actions rather than promises. The Caltheon Empire had not agreed to unlimited human expansion, but they had accepted the monitoring proposal. Human colonies opened their doors to galactic observers. Research facilities submitted to regular inspections. The Terran Federation provided detailed reports on their development to a neutral council. And slowly, grudgingly, the galaxy learned that humans were more interested in exploration than conquest. Haven Point had evolved too. What started as a political symbol had become a true embassy, a place where different species learned to work together. Vela and Jake had become something of celebrities in that time, the couple who proved that different species could build understanding despite their differences. But the peace was still fragile. There were still factions on both sides who wanted conflict. Still voices calling for humanity to be contained, still humans who resented oversight. Vela stood in her quarters, one hand on her swollen belly, feeling the child move inside her. Her daughter. The first human Caltheon hybrid to be carried to term. Medical science had made it possible, but that did not make it any less miraculous. "She's active today," Jake said, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her carefully. His hands joined hers on her belly. "She's always active," Vela said with a smile. "I think she gets that from you." "Hey, Caltheon babies kick too. Not like this." Vela felt another strong movement. "I'm convinced she's trying to punch her way out early." They both laughed, but there was worry beneath the humor. The pregnancy had been difficult. The doctors had warned them that mixing 2 species with such different biologies was risky. But Vela and Jake had wanted this child, had chosen to take the risk. Their daughter would be a symbol, they hoped. Living proof that different species could create something beautiful together. A chime sounded at their door. Jake answered it to find Commander Vorn looking troubled. "I'm sorry to disturb you," the station commander said, "but the architects have returned. They're requesting to meet with both of you specifically." Vela felt her blood turn cold. The architects had not been seen since they delivered their ultimatum 3 years ago. Their return could not be good news. "When?" Jake asked, "within the hour. They're insistent that it be private, just the 2 of you." Jake looked at Vela, concern clear on his face. She was 7 months pregnant and in no condition for stress, but she straightened her spine and nodded. "We'll meet with them." The architects appeared in one of Haven Point's secure conference rooms, their holographic form casting strange light across the walls. Vela and Jake sat across from them, hands clasped together. "Why have you returned?" Vela asked. "To reveal a truth," the architect said, "and to acknowledge an error." "What truth?" Jake asked, his voice guarded. The architect's form flickered and images appeared in the air around them. Images of Earth from 200,000 years ago. Images of early humans living in small groups, barely surviving in a harsh world. "We told you we attempted to contain humanity," the architect began. "We did not tell you the full story. When we encountered your ancestors, we saw the pattern of their development. We calculated probabilities. We determined that if left unchecked, humans would become a destabilizing force in the galaxy. So we acted." "You tried to kill us," Jake said flatly. "We deployed a genetic plague specifically designed for human biology. It spread across your population rapidly. Within a generation, fewer than 10,000 of your kind remained alive. We called it a containment weapon. Your historians call it the Toba catastrophe." Vela gasped. She had studied human history. She knew about the genetic bottleneck, the near-extinction event that nearly wiped out early humanity, but she had thought it was natural, a supervolcano or climate change. "You did that," she whispered. "You deliberately tried to exterminate them." "We did. We believed it was necessary. We thought reducing the population to a critical minimum would prevent humanity from ever becoming spacefaring. We assumed extinction would follow naturally." The architect paused. "We were wrong." Jake's hand tightened on Vela's, but his voice remained steady. "We survived. We adapted. We turned a genetic bottleneck into an advantage. We spread across the entire planet despite starting from fewer than 10,000 people. Yes, and that is when we learned true fear." The architect's voice carried something Vela had never heard from them before. "Regret, respect? We watched as your species not only survived but thrived. We watched you build civilizations, create art, develop technology. We watched you reach the stars. And we realized our mistake." "What mistake?" Vela asked. "We judged humans by our standards. We saw a species that adapted quickly and assumed that made them conquerors. We saw their refusal to accept limitations and assumed that made them dangerous. We were right that they were unique, but we were wrong about what that uniqueness meant." The images changed, showing human history unfolding. Cities rising and falling, wars and peace, technological advancement, the first steps into space. "Humanity turns every extinction event into an origin story," the architect continued. "Every defeat into a lesson, every enemy into a potential friend. When we tried to destroy you, you survived and never even knew we were the cause. You thought it was nature and you adapted to it. That capacity for endurance without bitterness, for survival without vengeance, is what we failed to understand. So why tell us now?" Jake asked. "Why reveal this after all this time?" "Because others will eventually discover what we did. Records exist. Evidence remains. When humans learn that their near extinction was deliberate, not natural, they will have a choice to make. They can seek revenge against us for attempted genocide, or they can choose to forgive." The architect's form seemed to dim slightly. "We fear humans not because of what you might do to others. We fear you because of what you might do to us. Your capacity for directed vengeance, combined with your refusal to accept defeat, would make you terrible enemies. But your capacity for forgiveness, for choosing peace over revenge, would make you extraordinary allies. We wanted you to hear this truth from us," the architect concluded, "so that when the time comes for humanity to make that choice, they will know we acknowledge our crime. We will accept whatever judgment you choose to pass." Silence filled the room. Vela looked at Jake, trying to read his expression. He sat very still, processing this revelation. The architects had tried to murder his entire species before they had even developed agriculture. They had caused the genetic bottleneck that nearly ended human existence before it truly began. What would he do with this knowledge? Finally, Jake spoke. "You said others will find out about this eventually. How long do we have?" "Perhaps a decade. Perhaps less. Your historians grow more sophisticated. Your genetic researchers probe deeper into your past. The evidence will surface. And when it does, when humans learn what you did, you expect them to what? Forgive and forget? We hope they will make the choice that defines them," the architect said. "Not revenge, but understanding. Not punishment, but progress. That is the choice that separates humans from the 46 warrior races we destroyed. That is the choice that proves you are not a threat to contain, but a species to engage with." Jake stood slowly, helping Vela to her feet. "I can't speak for all of humanity. No one can. But I can tell you what I've learned in my life. Revenge is easy. Anger is simple. But building something better, choosing to move forward instead of backward, that's hard. That's the work that matters. He looked directly at the architect. Did you commit a horrible crime against my species? Yes, would the galaxy be different if you hadn't? Maybe, but we survived. We're here, we're alive, and we're making choices about what kind of species we want to be. Spending our energy on punishment for something that happened 200,000 years ago seems like a waste when we could spend it building a better future. Then you choose forgiveness? The architect asked. I choose to focus on tomorrow instead of yesterday, Jake replied. I can't speak for everyone. Some humans will want revenge when they learn the truth, but I think most of us will understand that holding on to that anger doesn't help anyone. It doesn't change the past. It only poisons the future. The architect was quiet for a long moment. This is why gods fear your kind, it finally said. Not your weapons or your numbers or your expansion. We fear the human story. You turn impossible situations into opportunities. You make the unthinkable routine. You extend forgiveness to those who tried to exterminate you. That kind of strength, that kind of character, cannot be contained or controlled. It can only be respected. The holographic form began to fade. We will leave you now. But know this. The architects will not interfere with humanity again. We tried once and failed. We will not make that mistake again. Instead, we will watch and learn as you teach the galaxy what true strength looks like. The architect vanished, leaving Vela and Jake alone in the conference room. Vela felt tears on her face, though she was not sure why she was crying. Relief, grief for what could have been, pride in the man standing beside her. Are you okay? Jake asked softly, wiping her tears away.